You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Calvin Russell, a wide receiver, a freak athlete, a top 15 overall player in the country on 24/7 Sports. By the way, Brian, Syracuse isn't his top 12, and they are getting an official visit per himself. I saw a headline out there from On3. Date still to be determined. So your previous stance has been very simple on Calvin Russell. Syracuse has no chance. Now, all of a sudden, it seems like they do have a chance. So what has changed?
I think it's just the ability for them to get involved. Like, he's the one, when I was with him, interviewing him after Under Armour, that convinced me that Syracuse has got a chance with anybody when he made the comment about Fran. And that's great. But he also went through, and he's a really nice guy. And he said, hey, man, I want to give everybody a shot. I want to make sure I at least get everybody an unofficial, et cetera, et cetera. He wants to take 12 official visits. I don't see any way in the world that could happen. It's too many trips. But he's going to visit OV to Syracuse. There's no doubt. Syracuse, Miami are the two that I feel the best about. The in-state schools are trying to get him on campus, and he'll take unofficials, but we'll see. But he might have the best relationship with Syracuse. Now, he was at Miami on Monday. So this is a very fluid circumstance. Darion Coleman's trying to recruit him, the hotshot recruit out of Jones High School in Orlando. He's the quarterback commit from Miami. So there are a lot of different cards in the deck here that can end up being the key. But Syracuse, I mean, they've just worked their magic. He feels very comfortable when you bring up Syracuse. So they're definitely in the hunt.
And you know, the funny thing is, between those two schools, not only does Syracuse and Miami play each other again this season down in Miami, but also I believe Calvin Russell was in attendance when Syracuse beat Miami at the end of last season. So that can't hurt. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's what ultimately is going to get Calvin Russell to commit to Syracuse. But, you know, Brian, it can't hurt that he was in attendance and Syracuse had that crazy comeback. And they like to throw the ball around, which is pretty nice too. This is a question I don't know if I've ever asked you before. So he goes to Miami Northwestern. And Syracuse, in the class of 2025, recruited, to my count, 3 players from that same school. You got Eric Thomas, Darius Johnson, and D'Angelo Thompson. How does that typically impact a recruit when a school is getting a bunch of players from the same high school?
Depends on the area. South Florida people tend to stick together, so I think it has a little more impact. There are certain schools in the country like Duncanville in Texas or Baton Rouge Catholic, whatever it may be, that there's always a player coming out of there. So, Travis Minor signed with Florida State back in the day after work done, came out of Catholic and went to Florida State. There's things like that. But Miami Northwestern sends kids everywhere. It's one of the best programs in the history of high school football nationally. So I don't think he's going to be completely influenced, but those are kids that are just a year older than him. So he knows them. So that's probably the biggest factor. And then again, they're showing a lot of love to South Florida in general. Kids all over that area, underclassmen as well, they're recruiting. So I think that will help Syracuse because most out-of-state schools, they come down to Florida, they're recruiting 3 to 5 kids. Syracuse, it's more like 20. That they're really, they've offered more than that, but they're probably in on like 20 guys. There's no out-of-state program that's more involved in the Sunshine State probably than them, which is weird because it's an upstate New York school. But hey, again, I will give credit where it's due. I was openly wrong about Syracuse being able to recruit in Florida like they are. I didn't think they'd get some of the higher level guys, and they would just probably get mostly 3-star kids. I mean, the guys they got committed now, like Jarius Rodgers, that helps them. They aren't just getting guys. They got an offensive lineman from IMG. They're doing the right things, or those kids wouldn't have committed in the first place. And that's only going to build for Calvin in general. And again, like you said, they got 3 kids from Northwestern last year. That's another plus for the Orange.
Yeah, I guess initially it's surprising that Syracuse would be heavily involved in the state of Florida. And then I think about it more when I listen to your answer about the out-of-state schools. Some of those big programs, like let's say a Georgia, of course they're going to recruit Florida, but they got their own state that they can just recruit out of. And they basically can monopolize it because their only competition is Georgia Tech. they're going to beat Georgia Tech almost every single time in recruiting. And that's no disrespect to Georgia Tech. It's just how it is. You think about the state of Alabama, right? You got Alabama and Auburn. They got their own battle over there. You want to go to the Midwest? Well, that's just dominated by Ohio State, right? And then you also got Penn State, who's going to usually get all the really good Northeast kids. Hopefully Syracuse can really start cutting into that. So when you think about it, if you're Syracuse, you have to recruit somewhere where there's the best talent. So I guess they're just picking Florida as the place to do it. So it actually starts to make more sense in my head now that I think of it. Along the lines still with Calvin Russell. So Syracuse actually lost its wide receiver coach, Ross Douglas. He got he went to Oregon, and they just hired a different one, Miles White, former NFL wide receiver. It's not a bad hire by any means, but it is a position change, and Calvin Russell is a wide receiver. So how do you think that impacts Calvin Russell specifically?
Well, I think it's a big deal. He has to gain some momentum with that guy pretty quick. The sooner that he gets a chance to meet him, the better. And in May, I'm sure he'll be down in South Florida to meet Calvin and other people when he goes through for spring ball. But that's a relationship building scenario. The bonus with that is that Calvin's such a well-known kid and he's such a national recruit that it probably didn't take very long for that guy to realize, even without the other members of the staff telling him, hey, I need to recruit this kid. So I doubt it's going to take long. And Fran is still the glue in this. He recruits the elite kids and everybody really in some capacity. I can only imagine how sore his thumbs must be from texting all day. But I don't think it'll be as big a deal for them because they just seem to be coordinated. I know that's a really generic term, but in recruiting, oftentimes, even elite school, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, whatever, there'll be a coaching change. And then I hear about, well, the kid that was being recruited by them, well, that was his guy. And in 2 or 3 weeks, nothing. Somebody dropped the ball. I'm not hearing those kinds of things with Syracuse. That might be the most important thing out of this whole deal is they're orchestrating how they do things. And there's not a lot of drop off. Maybe there's somewhere that I don't know about it, but to my knowledge, they've just been really consistent. And when you do that, you'll always give yourself a chance. Congrats to Syracuse for that.
Now let's talk some basketball here because Calvin Russell, I believe he also has a scholarship offer from Syracuse to play basketball. Is that something that you really think is going to impact him in his recruiting at all? I mean, like, is Miami going to sit here and also offer him a basketball scholarship? What's the deal here?
I think there's a lot to do about nothing. In the long run, it's best for him to play one sport. Syracuse basketball is a real thing. You know what I mean? Like historically, I grew up with that stuff. So Derek Coleman and all that. I don't know how you would be able to be a guy that needs to add weight like Calvin. Like he's really thin. He needs that time in the offseason to be building muscle. So the basketball offer to me, while he could probably play at Syracuse as a minor role, he needs to concentrate on football. I know Miami says you can do it, but they really want him to play football. I was on a Miami pod earlier today on Rivals, and they were talking about that. So Syracuse might let him try it, but most kids realize really quick that the time commitment is awful doing just one sport, let alone two. So let's see how that plays out no matter where he goes. But Miami might let him play some basketball, but that won't suit what Miami's coaching staff wants. I really doubt it does for Syracuse either. So we'll see how that goes.
You know, there's only one Deion Sanders and there's only one Bo Jackson.
That's right.
Multi-sport freak athletes who both made it at the professional ranks. You know, Calvin Russell is a freak athlete, so you never know. But if you look up his basketball profile, actually, you don't really find it. So I think he's a much better football player. And, you know, I guess it can't hurt, but we'll see how it goes. I guess the final thing on Calvin Russell is very simple. What's the timeline here?
National Signing Day. He made it very clear he's going all the way to the end. So he wants to take the visits, and Syracuse will have to play the long game along with Auburn and Michigan and Miami and everybody else.